can we just kind of recap? Anybody have any comments or any follow-up from last week that they would like to talk about? If you remember, we had the panel. We had DA Dupree, and then we had Andrea from Livable Neighborhoods, who kind of went over the government layout and what that looks like. And for our newcomers, I can also get you that information. We also talked about, the legal piece of policies and what that looks like from his perspective. And then we had Val from El Centro and Pastor Rick from Moore Square, and they both basically talked about their experience from the advocacy piece of it, of going through policies. And so what we know is the main point of what we're doing of this series is to try to get us educated in the community so we can be ready to do policy work. And by that, I mean address any issues that may be related to, the focus has been greatly on police brutality and racism and things of that sort, but there's also a lot of other policies and procedures that allow that behavior. Mm-hmm. That contribute to the trauma in our community, that kind of quote unquote make it okay, so to speak. So being able to have a trauma lens, so we know what the language is that we need to look for in these policies and procedures, so that we know what certain policies and procedures could lead to as far as behavior, is why we want to kind of make sure that we're looking at this. So for those who were there last week, anyone want to kind of give an overview of what you thought? Did you find it helpful?
Chandra, I thought it was extremely helpful from Andrea's starting, in terms of how does the UG work. I learned a lot, especially really understanding more the role of standing committees and the need to be listening in on their work, that's really where the work was done. I thought that was a huge insight. And then I thought it was really helpful when we started also then just learning about I heard throughout there, 2 or 3 mentions of some policies that we just might want to keep our eye on and be mindful of. So already kind of starting to think about that from those individuals that were on the panel. So those are a couple of my reflections.
I would add to that a lot of people were confused as to how the United government worked. And so it was really clarifying, and you could just hear in people's, that's, and that's, I think, something that is unintentional. Decisions were made in the past and all of a sudden it's affecting us now. But I also thought that the work of the committees and just really who to contact in what situations. So looking at the levels of advocacy, is this a local, is this a unified government, is this a state, is this a federal kind of level of advocacy, was really helpful. So thank you.
Sure. What I think I got a lot of comments about was that people didn't realize how much power the mayor doesn't have. in our community. A lot of people get really upset, even though he's an elected official. His power is not as broad as we thought it was, right? So
can I interject there for a second?
Go ahead.
I agree that there's certainly a lot of things where the mayor doesn't have the power to do something, but relative to all the local governments in this region, he is probably one of the most powerful mayors around, much more than the Kansas City, Missouri mayor, and that's because of that veto threat, even though he hardly ever uses it, or she, and then also the ability to break ties. But even more importantly, I think it's very important to underscore that he sets the agenda. And when I was working in the mayor's office, I saw firsthand how the mayor can just unilaterally destroy an issue by saying it's not going to go on the agenda. Now, I don't know if this mayor does that or not, but it's that possibility there. That said, when it comes to, you have 10 commissioners there, and their votes, securing those votes is very, very important, and they can kind of, fill a vacuum if the mayor is not willing to use that power. So that's something to consider. I just wanted to say that because I think it's important to know that it works both ways. He does have limits to his power, but there's also, it's good to know where the power resides too.
Right. And I think to kind of piggyback off of what Andrea was talking about, most of the time when you hear the complaints from the community of
Yeah,
decisions that are being made, those are not necessarily directed towards the mayor.
right.
But we tend to loop everything into the mayor's position.
Yeah,
I like that she broke down what the commissioners do and the different positions do, like Kathleen, the steering committee and things like that, so that we could get a better understanding of who really does what and what goes on in those meetings. So we know when we hear, I put this on the agenda, but it didn't make it in the commissioner meetings, we know who kept what subjects off of the agenda. So that was good. So now we're going to move into any other comments before I move on. Okay. So I'm going to kind of do this.
I wanted to thank you for that for last week. It was very impactful, and we definitely have thought through it. I work with Head Start with KCK Public Schools, and like impacting preschool as well as the community. So it's been a journey, and I just am very grateful for last week. It was helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to have everybody be a part of it, because really Alive and Thrive is a community. It's not just me on the screen when y'all see me talking. It really is. Anytime y'all come into one of these meetings, or you participate in a training, or you participate in a project, you're automatically part of it. So I really want people to understand that this is the community's movement, not Chandra. So I have to say thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part of everything that's going on. So I'm going to kind of do this PowerPoint style. I know I have a couple of my facilitators who went through my trainings with me. I know Chiquita, Ms. Dola, Diane, if you all have anything that you want to add as I go. Of course, anybody can, but I know that they were part of the training, so if they want to add to a little bit more of the information piece, they can do that as well, okay? So I want to first talk about a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And I'm talking about this because when we start talking about trauma in Wyandotte County, or even our personal trauma, we can talk about it, but then what do we do with it? What's the next thing? I hear a lot of people say, this is just how a certain person is, or this is just how our community is, or this is just what it is. And it's just fixed right there. And they don't really see the room for growth, nor do they want to see the room for growth. So the challenge that I find, even working in the community, and some of you may be able to identify with this, that sometimes you just run into people and they're like, even when it comes to voting, when it comes to policy, why do anything? My voice doesn't matter. Like those kind of things. Like, where did those things come from? And why do we feel that way? And of course, we can attribute that to history. But now how do we get into a growth mindset where we can move on and move forward to what we are trying to do? So really, it's about shifting the perspective of a community. And I always say the hardest journey to go on is the journey of trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I do it? How do I get here? It's a journey, right? If you ever had to go on a self-revelation journey, my prayers are with you. It becomes the biggest thing ever. So this is kind of where we're at with our community as well. When it comes to shifting the perspective, like you see the first tree, it's just but it's not dead yet. So if we can help stand it up, help kind of change how it's functioning a little bit, then it can help it grow. My mom's a planter. I'm not. I will kill anything. So every plant I've had, I'll give to her, and it just kind of sits in her house. And then I try to take them back, and then, it don't work. So, but I watch her put sticks in plants and to help them grow until they get healthy enough to stand up straight. So my question, as we're talking about this, what is the stick that we need for our community? What are the things that we need to help everyone start seeing things a little bit different than what they're used to seeing? So let's identify trauma. We use the SAMHSA definition. And for those of you who don't know, when we do our trainings, which you're seeing, some of you have already seen, I'm using some of the same information from our trainings. It may be a little bit different, but this is just a piece of it. I have to kind of give you a little bit of it because we only have so much time. But individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning in mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Does anybody not agree with this definition? Sounds like trauma to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So when we break it down a little bit more, we have a definition of an event, and a definition of experience, and a definition of effects. But really what it is just something that kind of makes you pause in life and say, wait, what's happening? I don't know how to do this. Where do I go from here? You get stuck, and we call that the trauma response, and I'll go into that. This is why I say you can't identify someone else's trauma. If someone says they're traumatized, work from them from that perspective. We'll talk about some of the signs of trauma as we get a little bit deeper into this conversation, but that is the first thing. Let people identify their own trauma. There's different types of trauma. There's acute trauma, chronic trauma, complex trauma, and system-induced trauma. I'm gonna give you a little bit more definition of what those are. So acute trauma is a single traumatic event. It's limited in time, like an earthquake. Many people remember 9/11, where you was, what you were doing. You either totally remember or you don't remember any of it. It's like a blur, because that's kind of what trauma does. You either can sit and recall everything, or sometimes you just blacked out through that whole thing. Chronic trauma is the experience of multiple traumatic events, either singly or in combination. So living in an unsafe environment as a result of poverty, homelessness, domestic violence or abuse, or witnessing violence. So it's all of those things happening at one time. Complex trauma is the traumatic stress field, traumatic stress field has adopted the term complex trauma to describe the experience of multiple and or chronic and prolonged developmentally adverse traumatic events, most often of the interpersonal nature. So this is where your sexual abuse and your physical abuse were, because it's ongoing, right? This is where community violence falls in, because there's so much going on. And a lot of times if it can occur in the child's caregiving system and include physical, emotional, and educational neglect. So if you like move that over to the community piece of it, what are some of the things that you are seeing that look like trauma, right? And we'll talk about it a little bit more. You guys are going to break into groups and just kind of dig in that a little bit more. And what I'm hoping is that will give us more language as to kind of backdoor into policies. Like if I see homelessness on the street, is there a policy that addresses that? And what is it doing to either promote it or to get rid of it, if that makes sense? So I want to give you a little bit of neuroscience. We talk about generational trauma, and we talk about just how trauma affects the brain. And I always go back to, and this is just because of my beliefs, and I know that people have different beliefs, but I do not believe that we were created to endure trauma. So in my belief, it was Adam and Eve. They were in the garden, nice, peaceful, life was great. And then all of a sudden, they did something they weren't supposed to do, right? So they brought that on themselves. It wasn't necessarily meant for our brains to endure trauma. So every time we have a traumatic experience, something in our body, our cortisol goes crazy, our hormones go crazy, things start to happen that we weren't supposed to endure. We weren't supposed to have to endure grief and death and extreme sadness and all these kind of things. So with that being said, we look into the brain, into our DNA, and we look into our chromosomes, right, that are in the DNA.
Dendrites, yeah.
Yes. So they're the things that keep the chromosomes from connecting or fusing together. But when you experience trauma, they get shorter, and they actually contribute to your lifespan. So that's why they say people who experience more trauma or more, their lifespan, their life expectancy is lower. So yeah, telomeres. Thank you, Kathleen. So your life expectancy gets shorter the shorter your telomeres get. Those are the things that connect the chromosomes to each other in your DNA, right? So if I, as a mother, experience trauma and I'm not taking care of myself, not coping, my telomeres are getting shorter in my DNA that I'm passing on to my child. So my child now automatically, their DNA is already a shorter life expectancy if they are not able to be resilient, so to speak. So there is a way, like somebody saying, my telomeres are leaving. You won't know, but it could show up in your health and everything you're doing. You know, stress increases cortisol. So that's the health results of it. If you're gaining weight, or if you're doing, it can cause confusion, it can cause lack of sleep, all of that stuff can come from that. And so when we talk about epigenetics, as we talk about a lot, and the chromosomes being passed down from generation to generation, that's how that happens, if that makes sense. If y'all not following, let me know. Okay. But I wanted to make sure that we understood that trauma is more than just a word. It's physically affecting our body. And even when we look into the community piece of it, it's physically affecting the community. You can literally see the results of it, whether it's death or whether it's structural buildings, whether it's people giving up, complacency. It's a lot of different ways, but I just want us to be aware that this is not normal. The things that we say it's just not normal. And so when we look at the response from when we do have trauma that enters our life, fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And so what does fight look like in our community? And I'm keep going back to refer it because I want us to be able to take this from a personal perspective and apply it to our community as it needs to be applied. So just kind of take a moment and think, because you're all going to break up in a little bit, and I want you to talk about these things. But how does fight, flight, freeze, and appease show up in our community? What are some of the behaviors that we see, even when it comes to government? Like we saw this on a world level when COVID came, and everybody's like, what do we do? Like there was a moment, it felt like the world just shut down. Mm-hmm. By a little, everything just started shutting down because we didn't know what to do, right?
Right.
So the world just froze, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's an example of what that can look like when it comes to community. So also I wanted to touch on ACEs a little bit. ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. And I do not give this test because even though we're talking about trauma, a lot of people are not aware that they are traumatized. And I want you to be aware that this is kind of what they are measuring trauma with when they say if people are more likely to have health issues or outcomes that are not favorable for their family. These are the different categories that they test people in. And because I always say I don't want to open up a whole can of worms that I can't close, I don't have time to close. That's why I really like giving this particular test. Another reason why is because the original ACEs questionnaire doesn't go into everyone's issues, so to speak. The original test was taken by, or established by middle-class white college students, right?
Right.
So then we had to go to the Philadelphia ACEs because they decided everybody's not white, middle class, and in college. So there has to be some other things out there that people are dealing with that could also be considered trauma. If you remember when I said we can't tell people what their trauma is or what they've been identified with. So in the Philadelphia ACEs study, it kind of goes into like if you even witnessed violence, if you felt discrimination, adverse neighborhood experience, bullied, live in a foster care. So it kind of spreads it out. But what it does, it kind of gives people an ideal of if you ever go to therapy, your therapist is probably looking to see how many ACEs you have if they don't give you the test directly. And that is just to see how things can be addressed. If you're starting symptoms, again, like the health problems, there are people who, when they're abused, if you see children, they will do things like play with their feces. Like there's a lot of behaviors that come out of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences that if you go back and you deal with a person at a child's age, then you can kind of help address some of those issues. But it also goes into what our children are dealing with, right? So again, when we start talking about policies and procedures, and we start asking the question, if we see discrimination, what about this policy or procedure promotes discrimination of any kind? You know, and then that's what we have to fight for. That's what we're trying to go after. If we know that there's the foster care system, there's a lot of issues there that we want to address as well. What does that look like? Is that fair? So this is kind of giving you a lens again, where we need to go into, right? So impact of childhood trauma, and I will send this to you guys too so you can have it. But when we talk about it, we have bless you, Brenda. We have the cognition piece. Then we have brain development, behavior, mental health, relationships, emotions, physical health. We kind of can look at that even on a community level. Where is our community at emotionally? What age, what generation were they stuck at? Because when did the behavior become poor and poor self-regulation? When did it become aggressive? When did the poor impulse control kick in? You know, when we look at mental health, when did depression hit our society? When did anxiety hit our society? So different things like that are ways that we can kind of look into how this works. And even with our children, knowing what to look at when it comes to childhood trauma. So moving this into more into the community piece, when you have trauma, it's the 4 R's of trauma, you have to realize, recognize, respond, and resist re-traumatization, which is the phases that we're in. We realize that there are a lot of issues in our community. We're recognizing them. And now we're talking about the signs and the symptoms and what that looks like so that we can get ready to respond. And in that, we don't want to re-traumatize our community any more than what it's already been traumatized. So that's having bad training or having things that don't support, or even our leaders not coming together, then that is what we have to avoid, those type of things, right? So the foundation of trauma-informed care, and I'm trying to move through this, is commitment to trauma awareness, understanding the impact of historical trauma and oppression. And our agencies discriminate trauma-informed care with policies, procedures, and practices, and agencies that can be the government as well. They create safe context they can create safe context through physical safety, trustworthiness, clear and consistent boundaries, transparency, predictability, choice. So again, when we're looking at these things that we want to change, these are the things that we want to implement to help our community start healing, if that makes sense. Restore power through choice, empowerment, strength, perspective, skill building. When we talked about having classes to help train people for offices, get community members ready on what it would look like to be in the office. Like DA DePree said last week, even though he's the first Black DA, he had some trauma, some issues with some people being the first anything. So as we're getting people ready, we need to prepare them for all sides so they can already have the coping skills in place. Build self-worth through relationship, respect, compassion, acceptance, and non-judgment, mutuality, and collaboration. So this will help us give us a language of what we're looking for. Moving more into Wyandotte County versus Kansas, this is on purpose, and I believe this is the most recent one that they have, and it's from 2014.
Yeah.
This is how we kind of compare to everyone else. Now, mind you, what we don't take into accountability is the unreported things, right?
Right.
Some communities in Kansas will underreport, like Johnson County will underreport crime, abuse to keep their funding and to keep things in place. But even when you look at it as, for instance, on a social economic level, men may not report violence in the home as much as women will. They may not seek shelter and help as much as women will, right? So all is taken in accountability. And anything on here surprise you guys, or is this what you thought it would be? Is this anything about this chart stand out to you all?
I would say the surprising number is the mentally ill household number for the state is higher than, which is like, that's interesting. I definitely didn't expect that.
Well,
compared to Wyandotte County.
Yeah.
I think that's one of those underreported numbers, though, you guys, mainly because, that there's a huge stigma among a lot of populations about admitting there's an illness or seeking help even. So unless somebody's referred for services, they may go undiagnosed for many years. So that may be why it's underreported. But I do believe that's a underreported number, plus 5 years old, 6 years old now.
Yeah, but I think it's underreported on both ends, for Wyandotte County and for the state of Kansas. I think it's much higher. And I say that, one, because of the underreporting, and two, minorities don't trust mental health workers.
Right.
Speak. So, and if you grew up in a household like me, what went on in them four walls stayed on in them four walls. So we talk too much about other stuff that was going on. Anything else? Okay. So going from what we've talked about with the ACEs, and even when we talk about community, what we know that's going on, this is the pair of ACEs. This is when you take the ACEs at the top, again, and you can mix in the regular ACEs, the pair ACEs, whatever ACEs you see. So for us, if we made it a community, again, we could put the grief and different things like that up there. But what's in the soil? So what's contributing to those ACEs? What is saying? So if we look at so we have reports of police officers raping women, right? So that's a trauma. If we look at that, what can we see that's in the soil behind that? What's protecting that action? And that's called getting to the root. Right? So is there something that's, because we all need to be held accountable. So if there's a rule for our police officers, for our mayor, for everybody else, then there needs to be a rule for us, and vice versa. So if we can't go out and rape people, then what is protecting our government officials so that they can go out and do it? Why is it harder to prosecute them? So then we're getting into the soil of some things, right? And again, going back to that mindset, where we can fight policy and procedure all day, but if we don't start working on the trauma of what happens, are we really making a big difference? If we don't start thinking about the mental health and the heart of people.
Yes, yes. Amen.
So it works together. You know, once we once you recognize and you can respond to what's happening, but we have to look at it holistically. I'm not about doing the surface work, all this up here. We know what that is, but there's always something underneath it. It's kind of when the big trauma question is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. So looking in the root, it's what happened. Why is this okay? Right?
Hey, Chandra,
Yes.
this is Stephanie. Can I just add a couple things? Because I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit, or at least mentioned, that trauma, the genetics of trauma also is passed down it's been traced back to 16 generations for some of us. And that so trauma that was experienced by our ancestors 16 generations ago is passed down to us. Additionally, I think that also applies in organizations. So, for instance, Wyandotte County government, Wyandotte County Police, KCK Police, whatever entrenched in their organizational DNA has been passed down. And again, it's part of that whole piece of how do we get at the policy, but also understand how this is developed. But like in any of us, that it's not a healthy development. So how do we, like you said, address the heart of it? How do we address the heart of these organizations as well as the heart of our citizens?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it's totally true that, and that's a good example of switching it just from a personal thing to making it a community thing, and letting the personal trauma mirror the community trauma. Because you're right, it has to be a community epigenetics thing going on that's being passed down. If an officer is training another officer, then they're getting trained on the do's and don'ts that officer knows, and then they have to adjust to what they've seen and what they've heard and what the officer says. Like, and this is the good. So when we talk about Crime Dot, when people hear about Wyandotte, they're hearing it from people who visit or people who live there. I'm a dot from the day I was born, so I'm here, and I hear things like Crime Dot, and I hear don't go over there, but that is the epigenetics, the rumors that have been passed down for communities. So now that's how we react, if that makes sense. It's like the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And we are just now trying to, and I can't say just now, Wandotte's been resilient for a long time. And I think what's happening now is that a lot of people are getting even more tired of the trauma and what's happening. And now, how do we fix this? How do we go back to where ancestors may have put things in place that were not trauma informed, or they're like, we have open into the Underground Railroad, and I tell people this all the time. We had an open into the Underground Railroad. A lot of them settled here. Quindaro was settled on Native American territory. And so we have those mentalities in our epigenetics in Wyandotte County. So because they came and they settled here. So the mindset, the slave mentality, even though you're free, once you've been bound for so long, sometimes you don't know that you're free, or you're standing in the open field like, how do I get there? Yes, Kim, I am recording. So it is very important for us to know, really, when we go back, where did we even come from and how did all of this stuff happen, right? So I wanted to bring up the heat report. I'm gonna give you all a link to look at that on your own. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it is a report that I may have someone from CHC come on and talk about, because they actually, Community Health Coalition, they actually are the ones that put the heat report together. And it talks a lot about Wyandotte County in comparison to other counties, different things that have been put in place. Even when it talks about the redlining, as we know, the whole J.C. Nichols thing is falling apart in Missouri, which is a great thing. But he played a part in Kansas as well, and the separation of Wyandotte County and Johnson County. And
she's on the heap.
yes, please, if you
Good, yeah.
Thanks. So he played a part in that. So going into mortgage papers and going into our mortgage system, and seeing what they have in those forms that are traumatic, then that even opens up a whole nother can of worms, right? But the report gives us all those different things. Like, I was reading through that, and it's just really amazing. A lot of stuff that goes, kind of like how we were last week finding out about the government. Yeah. Like, wow, that's happening. That's what that is. That's where that comes from. You get the same feeling reading the heat report. Like, you may need to take a break and put it down sometimes, because it can get a little upsetting. But I encourage you to kind of go into that and look at some of those things. But right now, we talk a lot about the negative things. So I want to kind of talk about how resilient Wyandotte County is. But I also want you to do it from the perspective, the resilience, but I also want you to talk about Wyandotte County as far as where this trauma is showing up. Where is it originating, right? So this is where I'm going to put you guys in groups, because I want one group to talk about how it shows up in the people of Wyandotte County. And I want another group to talk about how it shows up. So you're talking about the trauma, how it shows up, and then how the resilience piece shows up, right? And if you need help with that, let me know. And then we need to talk about our systemic in Wyandotte County, how the systemic trauma shows up, and then how it shows up in our structure. And by that, I mean by how the look of Wyandotte County is. So that, and I'll give you an example. There are neighborhoods that are boarded up. Where does that come from? Everybody got me? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm getting ready to put you guys in groups. And what time is it? We're just gonna do about like 15 minutes. I'm trying to get you done a little bit early. But I want us to come back and talk about it. So I'm gonna give you about 15 minutes in your groups. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So what did y'all talk about? Share. Any group can go.
So in group 3, we talked a lot about how trauma shows up just in daily interactions with people. The interactions that may have changed just with the way neighbors engage, and even just the trauma of people being in fear, like at the grocery store, whether or not to wear a mask or not wear a mask. A lot of that showing up. And then we also talked about resilience and how more people are engaging, more people are learning, more people are getting involved in causes they care about, as well as art and the murals in the area, and just how art is an outlet for building resilience and helping people find a voice. So that's a super fast summary of a very good conversation that we had in group 3.
Okay. Did you all talk about the systemic piece of it at all?
We were starting to talk about just the dynamic of having a white male leadership for such a diverse county, but we didn't have the time to really drill down into that. Just how surprised I was when I came, because I'm in Jackson County, and when I came in and started learning about Wyandotte and realizing how diverse you all are, and yet how most of the leadership I was engaging with looked very much the same as far as diversity. So.
Yeah, that's from the top down, right? Like even in agencies, it's like you look at the boards and you look at the head committees. It's like, does it represent the people that they're serving? And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't.
No, not so much. So yeah, we didn't get a chance to really get into the rest of it, but we had a good conversation.
Right. So if I was to look at kind of like the taking the need for diversity in the leadership positions, if I was to look at that, I would say that can kind of contribute to an organization not being culturally competent, so to speak.
Mhm.
So they may forget to honor certain religions or certain cultures, or won't be as inclusive as other things. So that's when we talk about, so if we start diversifying some of these positions, then maybe some of the cultural issues that we're having. So that's when we're looking at pair of aces, how that makes sense.
Diane and I were talking about, well, my perspective is with, I work with Head Start with so early childhood and parents. So how we see trauma in the classroom, like kids can either be just shut down and detached, or aggressive and like throwing chairs and toys and having like these enormous concerns about their behavior, right? But I think the root behind it is trauma, you know, and that can be from like generational systemic concerns of racism or poverty, or just other traumas, right? Like someone was saying, it takes 16 generations or something.
16 generations.
I mean, yeah, it's just like we see it, right? So in Head Start, they are income qualified, so most of our families will fall below the federal poverty line, and the barriers that exist there are great, and the struggle to move past that is challenging for families. So what we were talking about of like solution or focus would be educating families on access to resources, and not just like giving them this stuff, so they can be able to like help their families in the future. But then Diane mentioned like that parable, like I said, we have to teach them to fish instead of giving them a fish, right? But then she said, we need access to the river to fish. And that's so true.
That is good.
Like, I mean, like we can teach them about finance, but like if they don't have like banks supporting them, or, you know, like the access to like grant funded education or whatever, it just, they don't get anywhere. And it's like a cycle, and it's hard.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about.
I totally agree with that. I know we have a lot of agencies that come in, drive-by help type things, come in and want to implement a lot of different practices in Wyandotte County. And I totally agree with, where's the access to the lake? Like I was involved, one program wanted to teach young people healthy eating, but they were using like the smoothies and things like that. But if they don't have access to fresh fruit, which now is like, where's all this fresh fruit and stuff coming, and this produce coming from in the community? Because it wasn't there when people were looking for it. Like if you look at the grocery stores, even though there's not really grocery stores in East Wyandotte County, but the forms of grocery stores that are there, you don't see good fresh produce. You don't see good healthy stuff as much as you would if you go back out Well, it's not saying that you don't see any, but it's not as accessible. And it's the same thing even when you go out into Johnson County. You even look at the stores, they just look totally different than what they look like here, and what they present and what they give. And so when I'm always like, you got to meet people where they are. So you can tell them how to eat healthy, but most of the time, if their mama goes to McDonald's all the time, it's kind of what's the healthy item on McDonald's list that they can get, and start them somewhere, start them on a journey. So that's kind of the weird part of meeting people where they at, is that you kind of have to come out of your own perception and your own place of how things should be, and kind of look at them as how they are until they get to that place.
Right. Like go into Family Dollar and walk with it with a family. Like there isn't out there. That's just interesting.
Yeah. That's good.
No, I think you guys are, this is Chiquita again. I think you guys are definitely in the right directions, because I know when I used to do my cleaning clutter cleaning programs or whatever, we would always select products that were in places where they could go, like to the Dollar General or to the Dollar Tree, so that they would, for one, be used to the product and everything. So I know when I started doing a program with Keeler back in the day, and when I and just really just talking about what that looks like, we were very, strategic in trying to find those supplies that they would be used to, so they, for one, they can have trust in that supply, to know that that can still do the same job as anything else. So I think a lot of it, as we start thinking about trauma and how it goes into the community, we have to meet people where they are, help them understand how they can do better. Like your example with McDonald's, a lot of the fast food restaurants now have the calorie contents, they have those kind of things. So we're educated. I know we have several nutrition educators on the Zoom today, and you start talking about that label reading and just kind of helping them understand to do the best they can where they are. But we are examples, and just kind of, and I think that's key as we work with the community and for people and for lawmakers, that we help them understand that we have to be the voice for the voiceless, and we have to continue to advocate no matter what. And if we lose us, the ones that are in the trenches that are fighting every day for this, it's going to be lost. So we still need to advocate, but we also need to build that advocacy with the families that we're working with. And so as we think about resiliency and we think about trauma, and how they can push past that trauma for the greater good for their families. And I think if we use that family as the baseline, because we believe in our families and we're going to advocate and fight for our families. And if we use that as a baseline and work up, I think that's going to help us as we continue these talks about how we serve people better that have experienced trauma, and how do we help them, bounce back or spring forward from trauma.
Absolutely. That's good. That's good. Our last group, who wants to speak from that group? Not sure.
I can speak with K-State, Chandra?
Just the last group, whoever was in the group that didn't.
Oh, group two.
Okay.
So I think that was us. I didn't pay attention to the numbers, sorry. Well, a lot of it kind of echoes what you guys were talking about. We kind of took a little bit of the analogy of, what was in the soil, what was the root. And a lot of it has to do with the poverty and lack of resources here in the county. And a lot of it is, I was even using this as an example, like those that are right now doing the case management and like Chiquita said, work in the trenches, we are part of the community. We grew up in it, we were kids that grew up in those kind of households that we know are now trying to help. And a lot of us are just like a sandwich above, our own client. So we are there in the struggle, and we see the lack of resources in the community. And we were trying to get to the root, of what was causing those lack of resources here, like only having one center that provides, full emergency, services fully, it's only cross lines. And then even to get to that, for many of our clients, they have to ride 2 or 3 buses to get there after they walk 5 miles just to get to a bus stop because they're not accessible to them. And that's just to get, you know, groceries because we have none around here, or nor can they afford the ones that are here. So one of the things that we kind of came down to is the lack of trust to those making laws and rules for everyone, especially the commissioners. There's no respect from anyone, no trust, because we were just talking about they don't have a whole community vision. They're just all individually focused in their own little areas, and that's all they work for. So if their neighbor is in need of something, they don't do anything for it because, like, this is my borderline, this is where my services go. And for many of them, it's not even that. They don't even attend to their whole area. It's just the emergency 4 blocks of where they live. So the rest of us are suffering for that. Did I miss anything?
Accountability piece.
Yes.
That's a huge accountability piece.
Well, and one last thing is that we were talking about that resilience, you know, that we have so much pride on. It could be a double-edged sword for us because at the same time, you know, we've always been able to roll up the sleeves and, you know, do whatever on our own. And then other areas and other counties just kind of overlook at us and it's like, oh, that's all right. They take care of their own. They don't need help and they don't need the funding. So we get overlooked in a lot of areas because, you know, we have grown to be resilient. You know, now our generation, it's our time to educate those are coming, you know, behind us. Many of us became caseworkers because we admire the caseworker that worked with our own family. So it's kind of like, where are those role models now to bring up the next generations and let them be okay with not being resilient 24 hours a day. You know, it's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to cry and be angry. And it's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, what Brenda said, Chandra, is that I think that goes to, like you said, we have to build a resiliency, partly because of what you said earlier, like we don't have the people represented, you know, on an equal playing field, like of the people in the leadership roles aren't reflected in the community. So a lot of times you're not going to get the understanding. So there's might be some pushback or some lack of, you know, understanding from different perspectives in the leadership roles sometimes. So I just wanted to throw that out there too.
That's good. Also, in conjunction with what you're saying, we're also overlooked because of the lack of trust we have in government, meaning that our community doesn't fill out census information like it should. They don't vote like we should. So even though so sometimes it looks like 10 people live in Wyandotte County, you know, so they're like, they don't need money. It's only 10 of them. They, you know, they can help each other type thing. So it is a double in that while we're working up here, trying to get this right, like how do we build the trust from the bottom as well? But I also think that we won't get the trust from the bottom until they start seeing change at the top. And I think that's where groups like this come in, trainings like this come in. And then even from some of the things that you all mentioned, so Brenda, when you were talking about the bus stops and things like that and things being so far, when we start talking about grocery stores, like where in the government do we need to make sure that that gets on the agenda, gets talked about, so that we can minimize all of the bus stops by creating more grocery stores, right? So when you start looking into ACEs and you start looking into the trauma, when we don't have grocery stores to feed our kids, you know, of course crime goes up because now parents are trying to steal to get what they do need. Because from the stores that we do have, the prices are so high just because it's a monopoly in that area. So you see, like it's like this train thing that happens. So many things just from why don't we have grocery stores?
it's a monopoly just with our utilities, you know, and they're having to
I
make a
didn't even
decision.
touch that.
It's like, do I pay my light bill or do I eat this month?
Do I pay my light bill? Do I get my medication? Do I get gas? Like what? Out of all of that, what do I do? Bernetta, is that you with the hand raised? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I was just when you mentioned the utilities, it's just like just a mind.
Please do not start.
You know, it's really just blows my mind. I for the life of me can't understand what is it that they do not see. They have to understand and they have to realize this is just ridiculous. I'm sorry for lack of a better word.
I got a better word.
I don't even have words to even speak about it. And yes, it is a monopoly. We don't have another choice because if we don't use them, then we don't have lights. Mm-hmm. So it's just mind blowing.
So it's things like that. When we start, and then it goes into, again, the decisions, pay my medical bills or pay for my lights, you know, all of that stuff builds up. So when we start talking about what community meetings do we need to be at, BPU has a meeting every month that does not get well attended by the community, which is, you know, and then they have some practices in their meetings that are not conducive to the health of the community. So is that an area that we need to start addressing? But now that we have the language, and I hope you all feel like you have more language around how to look at this stuff or whatever, even when we're standing in front of them and we need to talk and say why this doesn't work for our community, do we need to be more present there? Like, do we ascend on BPU, then ascend on the government, or do we split up and some people take BPU, some people take the government? Like, what do we? It's a lot of moving parts here, and so when we get into next time is I want us to start digging a little bit deeper into what some of these policies, what some of the practices are. So yeah, we'll have to talk about BPU. We'll have to talk about the police brutality issues. We'll have to talk about inner city violence. It blows my mind about the young boy that was shot, like in the midst of everything else that's going on. I'm just like, really, you know? But again, when we have a lot of mental health issues that have not been addressed, and then when we have not taught our community how to communicate, and all they know to do is fight, you know, how do we infiltrate that, you know?
So, Chandra, one of the things that we even said about that with the mental health is that a lot of our clientele does not even know that they suffer from a mental illness or that they have a trauma, because for them, that's their everyday life.
That's just how it is.
Yeah, and so a little bit is, you know, what we can do, or at least what I try to do, is just work with them a little bit to identify, you know, a little bit of that root of, you know, a lot of their actions, and a lot of them just a little medication. It's all they needed, you know, and they're functional and they're good. Or a little, you know, just small case management that, you know, a little more hand holding, but, you know, it gets through them. And it's just identifying. I mean, I'm so excited about Alive and Thrive, you know, working on that piece with the community, because there is so undiagnosed people walking out there, myself included probably, you know, but it's just kind of like there needs to be a talk and education about it, instead of just people being dismissed, you know, as a poor person when it's really a mentally ill person.
Well, we are able to come into your agencies and do trainings and different things like that for your clientele, if that's something that you want to look into doing. And I agree, a lot of people don't know, and a lot of times it's the language around it too. When you talk about mental health, the stigma of "I'm not crazy" goes with that. or stop letting people mess with your head and your brain, and in a time when everybody wants to acknowledge their own mental health or their own mental freedom. It's like, you can't really tell me anything. So it becomes, how do I, one, and we were talking about this, doing this a little bit ago, and we'll probably get back to it, but doing a workshop on what language we should use, because mental health doesn't work with people. The minute you say mental health, they tune out.
It's like the stigma.
Absolutely.
It's like labeling, and people don't get behind it. It's just like, you know, you say parenting class, and then no one wants to come to the parenting class.
I don't need you to tell me how to be
something's wrong with me. It's
Mhm.
like, and everything. And along with what you're talking about as well, I think is, you know, there's got to be a way of helping people understand. I know since this COVID-19, one of the things that it has inspired me to do is to pay more attention to what's going around me. So I have attended the BPU meetings. I have attended a school board meeting. I have attended the regular UG meetings, whether it's standing committee or regular or special session. But I think also we need that other element of that summary, because some people are not going to be able to sit there and listen. I think like the school board meeting that I was a part of, it was nearly 4 hours. It was nearly 4 hours. And all of the UG, I mean, with the special sessions, since they've been breaking them up, sometimes they'll start at 5 and then they'll go to 6, and then they'll come back at 6, and then they'll go to 7, and then they'll start another session. So it's like, where do I go? One of the things I found as another piece of that, because in case I did miss, I know like some of our news, and again, we have to find entities that we trust. So we need to find things that are accurate, that are portraying the right information. So I did go back, and in the Wyandotte Daily, I went back and they did an excellent job of the standing committee special session they did on the budget here in Wyandotte County with the UG a week or so ago. They did an excellent job of explaining, because you start talking about mill levies and point this and all this other stuff like that, that's going to blow a lot of us out of the water, correct? When they start talking this language or whatever. So having that trusted entity as well to summarize some of these talks for us, I think is a really good thing too. And I found that to be really helpful. And I said, now I spent all that time in that special session about that budget, listening to these mill levies and what's being supported and what's being cut and what's not being done. And here you are in less than a page, Wyandotte Daily, explain all that to me like I was 2. And so I think that is another element, because I'm telling you guys, I have been on these calls, and I think, like you said, with the last one I was on, with the last one BPU had, I think I was the only person on there, because you know, listening. So I think you're right. I think that somehow we need to let people start where they are, and if they are interested in a school board issue or interested in BPU, because one thing I did learn about that BPU, they really start talking about the UG fees and the BPU fees. And one of the things they talked about was separating that out so that the people would know, hey, if you have a problem about this related fee, like the payment in lieu of taxes, you know what I'm saying? That's a charge that they have in lieu of paying taxes. They're paying that to, you know, the unified government. Don't quote me because I'm not an expert at this, but you know, whatever reason they're paying that fee or whatever. So they want to break that out. So when you get your BPU bill, it will say BPU charges that are by the UG. So if you have a problem, you can go to 311 if it's a UG related question or fee, and if it's a BPU related fee. And I know that was one of the things they talked about in that last meeting about, you know, taking that out so that people can really understand where that's coming from. And I don't think a lot of people realize. I don't think a lot of people realize how those fees are calculated. You can go on their website. They do a display. When I do my financial literacy education, I take a copy of that. I download that copy. I break it down to people. You'll be surprised at how many people do not even read their BPU bill. They have no, I'm like, if you read nothing else, you need to be reading that energy and what are you doing? Are you keeping your lights on? So there's all these pieces that need to be, it goes back to educating and helping people understand. First of all, read your bill, see where you're using your energy. Is your house energy efficient? That's the first step. Are you keeping are you running that air, you know, all day long? Are you running your lights all day long? So it's got to be that balance, and whatever that balance looks like. But, you know, so if we can kind of help people to understand that piece too, and where they could go and find that information. Most of them are recorded. Most of them are on their websites. But again, I know you guys talked, you know, we talked about that last week as well. Trying to navigate some of these websites are challenging. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. I just think that somehow people have to understand that they have to get involved in something that's important to them, and start there, and just start there.
Yeah, and I think next week we're going to hit a little bit more on that.
Okay.
Right, people got to hit where their passion is, because
Right.
Because for a person who doesn't live in Wyandotte County, the issue of BPU may not be as big to them as an issue that has to deal with okay, I know everybody got to go. We're getting ready to leave in just a second, but thank you. But just it may not be as big as an issue as like the mental health conversation.
Right.
You know, so just being mindful of where we can hit, what we need to hit, especially now that we have a trauma lens on us, you know, what does that look like? So what I really want to do is make sure that we are pulling more community members into this. I mean, we all work in this community. We all work in, but what really makes the change is when we start getting our community members involved in these conversations, and they see these aha moments, and then they start telling their friends, who tell their family, who tell, and then we all end up at a BPU meeting. You know, like it's just, and so I encourage you all, if you have clientele that you work with, encourage them to be in these meetings, and encourage them to go. We don't have them up yet because we're having an issue with our website, but they will be up. But when we get that going, encourage them to look in those things, because Alive and Thrive's purpose behind this is when we start actually doing these projects or doing these things, we'll be able to support different groups in the community as they do this, whether they need financing for printing or whatever, we'll be able to do that. And so that's the point that we want to get to, where the community is actually initiating these conversations and these actions on their own. Okay.
That's true.
Any final questions or comments? Or thank you all for hanging in there with me. I hope this was helpful. And we will meet again next week. Okay, you'll get everything probably by Friday with the new Zoom links and all that kind of stuff. Okay, thank you guys.
Right.
Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Be careful, be safe. Have a safe 4th of July holiday.
Yeah, good point. Take care.
Yes, be safe.
I won't be celebrating 4th of July, but I'll eat some barbecue.
There you go.
Just be safe with the holiday. You know, it just creates opportunities, fireworks and things ended up in your yards. Hopefully we won't have any roofs burning up or any of those kind of things. So make sure your lawn is nice and wet.
I'll pay my BPU bill, so I don't have money for fireworks now.
Choices.
I'm the money for fireworks.
That is so crazy.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.